The objective of this lesson is to have students be able to interpret and solve problems using a bar graph with a scale of 2 or more. In the previous lesson, students discussed line plots, how they are organized, and what information they provide. This lesson's focus is on bar graphs. Third grade is the final year graphs are discussed until much, much later. It is intended that from this point, students will be doing lots of graphing in science, so it is imperative that students learn these skills well. Third grade only covers bar graphs and pictographs. In this example, you see how a bar graph has space between each bar, with each bar representing an amount or number. A pictograph is a graph or chart with icons to represent numbers. Suppose I take a poll of the third graders asking what their favorite sport is. How does a bar graph help me organize my data, and what other information can I learn from the graph? If I had each student write down their favorite sport on a card, I would have a random assortment of information. But it's difficult to gain any information from this data. A bar graph is a way of representing this data in an organized way. Bar graphs have a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. One axis represents the categories. In my case, I use the horizontal axis for the different sports. The other axis represents the numbers. On this bar graph, it represents the number of students. Notice that with bar graphs, there are gaps between the bars to help distinguish the different categories or quantities. Bar graphs help you see the number of responses per category, but what else can we learn from the graph? You can compare categories. For example, which is the most popular sport and which is the least? You can compare two things. How many more people like soccer than basketball? You can order the categories from least to greatest. It looks like the least people like the other category, followed by softball, then basketball, and most popular is soccer. Sometimes bar graphs can be scaled to make them easier to read when representing large amounts of data. Let's look at this graph. First, what is this graph about? If we read the title, it says the number of insects seen in the field. Notice that instead of each line being scaled by 1, each line now represents 2. So it looks like there were 14 butterflies and moths seen in the field and 8 grasshoppers, but how many dragonflies were there? Since the bar reaches between the scale of 4 or 6, then this bar must represent 5. Some questions we ask your child to answer as they use the information on the graph are: how many more flies were seen than dragonflies? How many fewer beetles were seen than grasshoppers? How many total insects were seen? And how many types of insects were seen? Bar graphs can be scaled differently as well as positioned differently. Some are vertical and some may be horizontal. Let's look at this graph. What is this graph about? It looks like the number of kilograms of food eaten daily by zoo animals. What is our vertical axis? The categories or different animals. What is our horizontal axis? The number or quantities. What scale is used on this graph? Students are asked to imagine they are the caretaker of these animals at the zoo and responsible for making sure every animal is fed. They are given situation cards with problems to solve using the data from the graph. If the bear food costs $2 per kilogram, how much will it cost to feed the bear for 1 day? Or, the elephant food comes in bushels of 15 kilograms each. If each bushel costs $7, how much will it cost to feed the elephant for 1 day? This is a great way of using math in real-world ways. Have your child look for bar graphs in the newspaper or in magazines. Ask them what they can tell you about the information in the graph. Have them make comparisons and write some math problems using the data. They can share their questions with their teacher and challenge their classmates to solve them. In this lesson, students learn about bar graphs and how to interpret and solve problems using them. We met the objective by looking at 3 different types of bar graphs using a scale of 1 and greater for a data set.